Now I'd like to welcome to conclude the negative case, negative reply speaker, L.
Mr. Speaker, the first question to ask at the end of today's debate was, who did the affirmative team think that they were going to help under this proposal? Because their characterisation was that they were going to help countries that had very little hope of developing and countries that were failing their people. What we told you right from the outset of the negatives team's case, that the people who most needed this development, the countries that were failing so substantially, would never get the benefit of this proposal because the sovereign risk would still be too great to go into these markets. And that's where the example of North Korea that was never responded to was important. So the people that they asserted needed this proposal most wouldn't have the benefit of it. But next we told you that the countries that we could trust to enforce standards, that the sovereign risk was low enough in those countries that people were already entering the market and that FDI and capital investment was already sufficient in those places. The small number of countries that the affirmative team wanted to rely on that had no ability to actually enforce FDI conditions, but would enforce standards of contracts against corporations that I told you had powerful states backing them, and that Paul and Swain told you corporations that were paying these countries wage by the affirmative team's own concession. We didn't think that that small group of countries existed in today's debate, and that actually countries that were able to enforce conditions when they had actually increased the autonomy of corporations to exploit their population were not an actual or real stakeholder in this debate. But even if they were, we brought you analysis as to why, if this proposal ever worked, the long-term development would be compromised in that state. The second affirmative tried to tell you that neither team can assure this and we should just prioritise short-term development. I know this sounds a lot like first speaking indignation, but I spent a really long time in my speech telling you 3 reasons why this proposal undermines development in the short and long term. And it wasn't good enough for them to just point to the fact that it wouldn't necessarily happen. We told you the risks were great enough. 3 reasons. Firstly, we told you that it undermines the state. That you told other investors around the world that that state was unable to handle its own development. We told you that it undermined the engagement with that state because they would have no incentive to take conditional loans. Paul told you that it undermined that state's relationship with the Western world, which could actually provide more aid to that country than this proposal. But Paul also told you that it undermined the population's affinity with that state and undermined the government as a result. Secondly, we told you that it undermines the development of the population in the rest of the country, which we asserted was the majority in today's debate and that they didn't contest. We told you that the corporation has no interest in ensuring the rest of that country, and the concession that they would irrigate water from other parts of the country was also evidence of that. We told you that this proposal would not develop education or infrastructure that wasn't in that corporation's interest. And we also told you that it would lead to social unrest in that country. Finally, we told you that it would lead to environmental exploitation because the only incentive would be to destroy and use that land for the 99 years that you held it in. It wasn't good enough for the affirmative team to say that long-term development was affected by other factors. That didn't disprove that this factor would undermine long-term development. So next, let's look at short-term development, because maybe the benefits in the short term were enough to disprove all of that long-term stuff. We didn't think that was the case. We told you it wasn't because the short term wasn't that bad, because capital investment in Africa was already leading to gains. Moreover, we told you that the benefits to wages would be small, because the competition and race to the bottom in these companies would mean that they wouldn't have substantially higher wages than anywhere else. But we also told you that those countries would be foregoing the tax of that investment otherwise, so they couldn't invest in infrastructure. At best, Mr. Speaker, the affirmative had a small number of benefits for a small number of people at the expense of more people and more benefits in the long term. That's why the negative team won this debate.